Welcome to Spotlight. I'm your show host, Barbara Ragland. And today we have two wonderful guests, and I'm doing something different. We're going to talk about ministers' wives today and their roles. And it should be very, very interesting. So I'd like to introduce my guests. And the first guest I have is Patricia Green.
Hi, Barbara. Nice to see you.
Welcome to Spotlight,
Thank
Patricia.
you.
And she is a minister's wife from Phillips Metropolitan CME. And the next guest I have is Mrs. Rosa Finner. Welcome to Spotlight, Mrs.
Thank
Finner.
you, Barbara.
And I'm going to call them Pat and Rosa.
That's fine.
Now,
Right.
Rosa Finner is the pastor's wife from Mount Olive Baptist Ministries, right, in Hartford, Connecticut. Both of these first ladies are from Hartford, Connecticut, close to Windsor, but, you know, they're from Hartford, Connecticut. So the first thing I want to ask you ladies is, how long have you been married to your husband, the minister? You know, how long, I'll say, how long have you been a minister's wife, Pat?
Okay. I've been a minister's wife for 33 years.
Wow.
My husband was not a minister when we married. We were married 2 years before he became a minister.
So that's different.
Very different.
So that must have been quite different.
Oh, yes.
So what made him decide to become a minister?
Well, we were in a revival, and he felt the Lord speaking to him through this revival that we were in. He has always been active in the church anyway, but he just felt that special calling through this revival that we had at the church, and he accepted the call of the Lord at that time.
How did you feel about that?
I was a little shaken. I must admit, I was a little shaken at that time because we had just been married 2 years, and I didn't think I was ready to be a minister's wife. I just was I felt I was just a newlywed at that time. So it was a little shaken. I was a little shaken about it, but the Lord has seen us through, and we've been in the ministry now for 33 years.
That's wonderful. How about you, Rosa Finner?
Well, I've been married to a minister for 29 years. Excuse my voice. And unlike Barbara, when I married Bishop, he was already, pastoring.
Okay.
And so I had the opportunity to know him first as my pastor.
Okay.
So, and that's how we got together.
And you knew what you were getting into.
I knew what I was getting into, and it also gave me the opportunity, to look and observe other first ladies and to watch and see what I didn't want to be like, and some of the traits that I would like to, be like. So I think that was an advantage.
Did you feel as though, either one of you can jump in here, feel as though you had an obligation to take some kind of leadership role or some kind of project as a minister's wife, or just in the beginning to sit back and reserve, be kind of reserved and see where you might fit in or not? Tell me about that.
Well, as for me, my husband has always been in the church, and he was in his home church, Phillips Chapel CME, and he was appointed the following year by the elder to a church in Cambridge, Ohio, which was 85 miles from our home. So we commuted back and forth. And it was a small church. It wasn't organized. In fact, it was in a house. And it had a pot-belly stove at the time. And so wasn't many members coming. So I took on the role. I was teaching anyway in the Akron Public School System. So I decided to be one of the Sunday school teachers there. And it was a delight. I had 3 young ladies, and we had a great time together. And that was my first encounter being a minister's wife and also doing an active part, playing an active part in the church as a Sunday school teacher.
And I know your reputation as a good Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Finner. Bethany loves you.
Well,
so tell me about yours.
I had the advantage of starting in my home church, and please excuse my voice.
Drink some water.
And excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always worked in the church, you know. So when Pastor came, I was the church historian.
Okay.
And from there, I was his backup Sunday school teacher and Wednesday night Bible study teacher. So, and being at home, I was baptized in that church. I grew up in the church, so everybody knew me as Rosalie. So when I got married to a pastor, it was still Rosalie. I didn't know what First Lady was until I came to Hartford. I mean, because, I mean, I was just one of them. And so I found my role quite different. You know, it's different than growing up in your home church and everybody know you and you're who you are. I mean, they knew you from a child. But then when I moved to Connecticut, and that was I guess you would say the fear, because you're coming into the unknown. You got to get to know people. And at the time when my husband and I moved here, it was just the two of us. I had no family, you know, and it was like, okay, I got to get to know, who do you trust? I mean, you know, and that's still something you still have to be, you know, cognizant and very important about. But my beginning was in my home church.
And you had that experience too, Pat. You came here and did you know anyone when you came here from Akron?
No one at all. In fact, we thought when Bishop Walker became bishop, we had no idea we would be coming to Hartford, because we knew there was a couple of churches open in North Carolina, and that's where we thought we would be going. And then the bishop called and said that he wanted us to come to Hartford. And I told my husband, well, this is an opportunity for you to grow, because there was so many things that he could be involved in at that aspect. He'd been at St. John CME Church pastoring for 16 years. And so I think he was even ready for a change.
So how have you adapted? Did you have the same problem like Rosa, trying to figure out, well, what, who, what, why, where, when? How did you feel coming into
being new and everything? You know, I can truly say the people of Phillips wrapped their arms around me, and they welcome us, and they have just been such a loving congregation. They really have. They made us feel welcome the very first day we came, and they treat us very, very nicely. And I have just grown to love them, and I hope they have grown to love us also. Yes. So I'm very happy. I'm very happy with the church situation. Now I do miss my family in Ohio, but they come. In fact, they were just here for our 80th church anniversary. They came up, and I was very happy for that. They really enjoyed themselves, and so they do come every now and then, and we do go home every now and then, make sure things are going well there, because my mom is still living, so I try to get home as much as I can.
So I have to, I got to nitpick for a minute, because when I met Pat at Zumba, she said, and I kept saying, oh, Green, who is this? You know, and I'm thinking, I know almost everybody, you know. And then when she told, so then she says to me, I was LeBron James' teacher. And I said, I know her, because, you know, you mentioned it before. So I have to tell you that when I used to operate Head Start, Marcus Canby was one of my Head Start kids.
Okay, I love it. All right.
And, his mother, you know, because when you work with Head Start, you work with the whole family, you know.
Right.
And,
that's correct.
I didn't think about it until one day one of my kids, when I was in the first grade after I had left Head Start, he brought this huge sneaker to school. And I said, what? He said, Marcus Canby said hi. And then, you know, and plus his uncle was a custodian at Sand Elementary School, you know, Rick Canby. But then I had another student that played with the Wizards. Okay, and his name was Michael. And I don't remember Michael's last name. Oh yeah. So Michael now is a commentator down there in Washington,
Oh,
but he
how
also
wonderful.
he played in the NBA. So I said I got to tell Pat that I got some things going on too. But it's funny because I'm a teacher and been in so many parts of education all over the country and in Puerto Rico and different places, and so I don't like to say too much because then it'll tell how old I am. So I said, well, I'll just leave that alone. I said, but I'm a teaser about
that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was
yeah.
Michael Adams was my other basketball player.
Oh,
And,
okay.
he played with the Wizards a long time. And I remember him because he was in my 6th grade class, and every day he'd come up to say, Miss Ragland, can we go out? I said, Michael, you're 10 years old. He said, well, when I get a little older. Well, I said, yeah, Michael, when you get a little older. So when he went to the NBA, I told my girlfriend, I said, I better call Michael. So, Mrs. Spinner, how about your, adapting to Hartford in the beginning? One wonderful thing that I have to mention is when you came to Hartford, you and your husband built a church right on that corner, and they have been struggling and trying to build that church, Mount Olive Baptist Church, for years, and we grew up partially there and partially at Shiloh, and so it's quite a legacy that he's leaving and that you're leaving. So can you tell us about some of that? And then the Mount Olive Daycare. And I have to talk about that also because my grandchildren went there. In fact, I got a great-grand that's down there now, Gabriel Ragland. And then Sydney went to Mount Olive Daycare over at Central Baptist, and my Shawnees Ragland, both Raglands, they went to Mount Olive Daycare at Central Baptist. And one thing I have to say is the food must have been good because they laughed and said that Shawnee would come in the morning, she'd eat, and after a while her face would be in the plate. She ate so much she fell asleep eating. So I think that's quite a legacy.
Thank you.
And as far as Pat, too, Pat's in a brand new, gorgeous church. Isn't that church beautiful?
It is gorgeous. And then we have the office complex, which is next door to it. So that is gorgeous. In fact, we had our anniversary dinner over in the plaza. They call it the Office Plaza over there. And it was very nice.
I remember that. So, Mrs. Spinner, you're getting ready to move on up, go on down home. How do you feel about that?
Well, I have mixed emotions because after 26 years, you do develop friendships.
You do, yes.
Then even when I go back home, those friends that I grew up with, they're either gone, moved on, they've died, or either they're not, we don't share the same interests, I'm going to leave a great family. Mount Olive has really been a true family to us, and they have exemplified love, and I think is sincere. We love them. But our desire now is to, although he's retired from the ministry of pastoring, we're looking forward to starting a Christian Life Center in Carolina where we can minister to the total man.
That's great.
And so we're working on that. So we intend to stay in the ministry, only in a different segment. It won't be the pastoring part.
And that really will be wonderful, because that's what people need now. You can sit next to someone in church and you never know what's going on with them. Until someone might tell you, or they might grab you and tell you, or sometimes you never know. And in these times, many people have problems, whether it's mental, physical, and just, I remember Whitney Young, I don't know if you read Whitney Young's book called The Hidden Poverty, and he talked about how when you drive through now with all these different highways, you don't see the little country houses and whatever, and the poor people where they live now. All you see is these sleek cars going up and down the highway. So you never remember or think about all the poverty there is way back in the woods or whatever, or how people are really living. So that would give you an opportunity to be a helpmate, and people get enthusiastic about that kind of idea, and I think it's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
Yeah, I really do. So what are some of the difficulties? Now, I know it's not all roses. Have you had any difficulties or thoughts about being a first wife or the first lady of the church? Because it kind of, you're held in high esteem. People, whether you realize it or not, there's a husband, but then there's the first lady, and they have some expectancies of you, and sometimes they're not fair, but they do. And I don't think it's necessary all the time, but what kinds of things are expected of you? Rosa?
Well, I think the expectation is to be expected, because, the higher the calling, the greater the responsibility.
Yeah.
And we are set as an example because our husband has been put or placed in a position to lead. And although there's diversity in the church, you got to come together. And whether it's fair or unfair, I look at it like this. I see myself not as a first lady, but I see myself, first of all, as a Christian. And then I ask myself, how would I conduct myself if I were not, And I'm reminded here of Shakespeare's Hamlet, when the young man was going off, and the advice that his father gave to him was, to thine own self be true. And I find that if you're true to yourself and not try to live out what others expect of you, but live out your life according to what God expects of you. And if we do that, I think everything else falls in place. And yes, they expect us to live above reproach, but they don't look at it as being, we're all children. We all are under the same standard. Sure. We're all human. And then they expect our children to be better than their children,
yes.
So, but I think these things that when you go into it, being the pastor's wife or a minister wife, these are things that you need to share with your children too. And I find that another difficulty is that sometimes people can be so insensitive, Barbara, and they don't realize, especially when you have young kids, that they will talk negative things about the pastor. And the kids are there hearing it, and so our job as the pastor or the parent of the kids are to tell them that everybody in the church is not saved. People, gonna say bad things about your father, but just who your father is, and you respect and love him for who he is. So I think if we do that, it'll help all of us.
I think that's beautiful.
I do too.
That's a beautiful thought, and something really to keep you focused, and that will help you focus you. Because I know sometimes you say, "Oh no, why did I do this?" But you're focused on what you said. That's really a good focal point. Well, how do you feel about it, Pat?
I feel about the same way. I'm a Christian first and foremost, and I want to do what's pleasing to the Lord. And I know people may have high expectations of what I should or should not do, but like Sister Finner said, you have to be true to yourself and do what you feel that is right. And most of all, I want to be a support and help to my husband. He has days where he comes in and he has really had a hard time dealing with certain people in the church that give him a hard time. So I try to be an ear for him, a listening ear, and I help, make to him. And that's the most important thing I think I can do, is be more supportive and helpful to him.
Well, I know that I don't know if I've ever shook Reverend Green's hand, but I've been in the audience where he's been at different occasions, and also around Reverend Fenner a lot. And I have to say that they have great dispositions.
Oh,
So,
yes.
you know, they really do. You know,
Yeah.
I've never seen either one of them get angry or, and I've seen some ministers, you know, I won't even go into it. But I say both of those men really set an example of how you're supposed to act and be pleasant all the time. And I can imagine it must not be easy. I'm telling you.
Because you have to smile at people even when you don't want to. You have to
Oh,
be pleasant
yes.
to people when you don't want to. But the Lord says we have to do it. We have
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
You know, Barbara, may I interject, please?
Sure.
You know, my grandson said to me, he said, how can you smile at people? He's 17. How can you smile at people when, you know, they don't like you or they don't like, you know, he called him Papa. And so then you have to go into the explanation that we do this because we are, you know, a Christian. And we have to love those who don't love us. You know, it's easy to love those who love you. I say, but the test comes when you can genuinely love. And like Sister Green said, you have to smile when you don't feel like it. But your smile, even if you don't feel like it, Sister Barbara, it's genuine.
That's true.
It is
still
genuine. We don't feel like smiling, but the God in us, you know, constraineth us to bring out that virtue that He so desires of us. And so it is a difficult thing. And another thing that Sister Green said that there are many nights that the membership do not know how heartbroken their pastor come home.
That's right.
And, you know, there are things that he can't share with anybody. And some things he can't even share with us at the time. I know when I asked him after a meeting or something, I said, how did it go? And he'll say, fine. And I can tell by the look of his face, don't talk to me about that right now.
Right.
You know,
I've heard that
so
too.
you have to just leave it alone and wait till the time comes when he's ready to talk and be that support that he needs.
Yeah, and I do think that's your primary job as First Lady, to be supportive to your husband, and, you know, regardless of what other people might say or think, you know, your first obligation and your first, you know, you have to, he's your husband, plus he's a minister.
Yes.
You know, a husband is one thing, and then on top of that, a
Minister,
minister.
too.
That's a double whammy. So I think your role is first, I don't know, you can correct me, is to be a supporter to your husband and his position as a minister and a pastor and the head of a church. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's first before trying to get involved in anything else in church?
I do. I agree
Yes.
with that. I
Yes.
think that's foremost important, because we have to be by his side, and when people don't want to be bothered or when people have problems, and tell him problems and things, you know, he doesn't share with me, you know, but he he needs that ear. What would you do if a situation? Sometimes he presents situations and asks me, well, how do you feel about it? What would you do? And I give him my opinion, but I said, first and most, I pray. I pray about it and let the Lord lead you. And I'm sure he will lead you to an answer that you will be able to help and be a benefit to that person, you know, that's going through something.
You feel that way, Mrs. Finley?
Yes, I do. I can't say anything to add to it. I mean, she expressed it very well.
Yeah, yeah. If you had, I'm not saying your life to live over, but some incidences or some things that have happened in your in your role as the wife of a minister, would you do anything different?
As I look back, I don't think I would do anything different. I think each church that we have been in, it's, you know, had its own unique situation, and I tried to find, you know, what would help the whole congregation, what would I do? Because I have been a Sunday school teacher. I have been singing in the choir. I've sung in the choir. I have been over young ladies at the last church we were in. I was in the Missionary Society, and I was secretary over a group of young ladies, and we had a good time. We visited the sick, and we mentored the young ladies and men at the church, young men at the church. And so as I look over, each situation brought a uniqueness to it, so I tried to fit in where I saw that I could be most beneficial to that situation.
What about you, Mrs. Finner?
I was thinking as Sister Green was talking, I don't think there's anything that I would do differently, because I think to become active in the church which your husband is pastoring shows leadership too, because how can you expect for him to have other leaders or other people working in the church and you're not doing anything? And I think each of us, you know, has a calling, because Sister Green is not First Lady, if for lack of a better term. I don't like that term, but she's not First Lady. I'm not First Lady because, you know, God ordained this before we were even born. He knew that we would be in this position. So my thing is that, Lord, have I honored the role, the position that you ordained me to be? Have I glorified you in my position? Have I, you know, edified the body of Christ in my role? And have I brought souls to Christ? Those are the things that I ask. And if I haven't done that, then everything is in vain.
That's true. That's true.
Well, Bishop Finner is leaving, and we're so sorry, but he's done just remarkable things in Hartford. And Mrs. Green, I hope your husband doesn't want to become a bishop anytime soon, because we like him. You know, every time we get a minister in the AMB or the Metropolitan, here they go, they want to be a bishop, and we don't, you know. So we lose a lot of good ministers, you know. And ministers are really very important. They're very important, not in only at the secular, but in the religious community, but they're important in the school systems. One of the, I think Dr. Reverend Battles was the president of the board, and also Reverend Moody from Shiloh. But at different times in the history of Hartford, ministers have stepped forward, and I'm telling you now, I think they need to keep it up. They need to step forward and help these kids in school, you know, help them in life. And sometimes it can't always be done, you know, coming to church every Sunday. And I think the ministers need to show their presence in the Ministerial Alliance. I really believe that, because I can remember that when there were problems in Hartford, maybe in the 60s or 70s, those ministers went to the schools. They really did, you know. And it's really important that and the school system knows, because a minister can step in the superintendent's office and tell him, you know, so-and-so happened here, and this, I don't appreciate it, and let's sit down and talk about it, and how can we do it better. He can do that better than any politician, okay, because they know that the ministers control a large population. And like we used to say in the 60s, they're the last stronghold of the community. The church is. The church is the last stronghold. And so we've got to be cognizant of that and depend on them also to help our children in school, to look out for them, to look out for the staff. You know, a lot of people can come in and say, oh, you need to do this and you need to do that. But trust me, when a minister steps in an school administrator's office, they sit up and they listen. And I hope that will come to pass more and more, because it did at one time, because they need that. They really, really need that. And do you have any parting thoughts about our interview? Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think you missed anything, but just to piggyback on what you just said about the school. Our CME organization has what they call national organization, which is called One School, One Church. And so we connect with the school and give them supplies. And before my husband even left Akron, we had partnered with the middle school in Akron, and we would give them supplies, and the men of our church would go over during the noon hour and help out at lunchtime, during recess time, and once a week we would do that, and it did make a difference because the young men and women really respected more so, and I think they acted better when they saw, especially men, because we don't have many men going into the schools, going into teaching. So I think that really helped during that time, you know, when they're there.
Yeah, that's true. Mrs. Finner?
I agree. Ministers, pastors, they carry a lot of weight. And, you know, years ago, Barbara, when I was growing up, there was one thing that, well, two roles that were really respected, an educated teacher and pastor preacher. And I think that God is bringing the country back to that, because we have strayed away so far and we have lost our morals, and it's time that the church stand out and stand up against all the immorality, and so that we can become the nation that God has so ordained.
I think so.
That's true.
I really do. And I think it'll come to pass. It's just that, you know, we hate to lose Reverend Finner, and Reverend Green better stay here. I don't want to hear
I pray that he
you
does.
know, he wants to be a bishop. I ain't working on being a bishop, you know. And I can remember Reverend Walker in that building that you had used for, you know, your banquets and stuff, and how he got that from the board, and how he was a smart man. I'm telling you, he did a lot of stuff in Hartford. And one thing that he did, and he told, I think, Reverend Turner, when he came here, he said, you stay involved in the community. And he took Reverend Turner around and introduced him to a lot of, you know, people in Hartford, and told him how to operate and work in the community. And that's one thing Reverend Walker did. And that's how he built that church, you know, how he got that building from the board, you know. There's a lot of stuff he did. And Reverend Finner, the same thing. You know, they got involved in the community, and we can't lose all our ministers. We need them right here in the greater Hartford area, even though I live in Windsor and have been in Windsor about 35 years, but I grew up in Hartford and always went to Hartford churches and whatever, and my kids went to schools around Hartford and greater Hartford, and it's really important.
It is.
It's
so
really important. So, and I can remember at Union, I don't know if you were here, Mrs. Finner, when we had Reverend Williams, and when he retired from Union, then he subbed in the school system in Bloomfield, you know, and the kids were like, that's Reverend Williams. You know, he will teach English today, you know, and he never had a problem, you know. They just thought it was wonderful. And like you say, even for them to just walk through the buildings or just, you know, introduce themselves and make themselves known. You know, I'm Reverend Green from Phillips CME and whatever. You know, it makes a difference.
It does. It really does.
Be surprised sometimes what you walk in on. And I think it's important. Just like I think the role of the First Lady of the church is important, or you want to call it the minister's wife, is very, very important. And I think how you use the role and what you do is up to you. And you know, your first obligation is to your husband, and there's different ministers have different wives, and the wives don't all have to be the same.
That's true.
And they have to, like you say, act the way God, they think that God wants them to act. And I think that's really, really important. You have to remember that, and praying is really important. I'm telling you, when you get a church full of people, and Christians especially, you better pray. Stay on your knees.
I agree.
So it has been a pleasure I have
Thank
enjoyed
you.
this conversation and having you as my guest on the show.
Well, thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank
We
you.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
And so, you know, may God's richest blessings be yours, and I hope you pray for me.
We will.
We will,
Yeah.
We will.
definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You learned a lot about the role of the ministers' wives from Rosa Finner and Pat Green today, and I hope you remember some of it and have respect for the minister and his wives and their roles. It's not easy. They smiled and talked very nicely, but I know deep down inside they've been through some things that weren't very easy. So this is Barbara Ragland saying, be kind to yourself and others. And don't forget Pat Green, and she's right down on Main Street at Phillips CME Metropolitan, and Miss Rosa Finner, and you remember it's on Battle Street, that church that her husband built. Okay? So until next time, God bless. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Barbara.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.